In this video, I want to talk about the rules I would use in my classroom and why I decided to use the rules and how I'd reinforce them and whatnot. So first of all, the actual rules themselves. The rules themselves are pretty basic, and that is on purpose. Like we learned in your class and in Sean's class, we definitely want to keep them basic and we want to keep them universal. So I landed on this set of rules. Listen to when others are talking, follow directions, keep hands to yourself, and respect others. I would like to have these rules be determined through like a classroom discussion or some sort of vote. Keep in mind this would be for a DCD level classroom. So I'd have to adjust it to make it fit the needs of the students. But I definitely want to keep this as a process that all students can kind of decide on. That way they know where the rules are coming from. You know, they're not just sitting down and seeing a long list of rules and knowing they have to follow that for the rest of the year. And then hopefully by them actually having a say in the rules themselves, they'll be more inclined to follow the rules. But with that being said, I would make sure the rules made sense. I would make sure they weren't too like specific, and actually helped move the classroom in the direction that I'd want it to move. It wouldn't just be like, don't wear your life jackets to class. Like that doesn't make any sense. So yes. How would I reinforce these rules? How would I keep students actually paying attention to these rules and keeping with them? I would use positive reinforcement, and I would make sure the pairs that worked in the classroom with me were on the same page with me as this. I'd be very I'd have that conversation with them. So we would have to be very proactive with our positive reinforcement. Whenever we see a kid, a student that is listening, when they're supposed to listen, I would want to go out of my way, or someone on the staff to go out of their way and say, congrats, thank you for being on task. You're doing a great job with that. Or, a student who has trouble following directions, then we go and congratulate that. And even if it's a student that is good at following directions, I think that needs to be called out too, and we need to make sure we're reinforcing that behavior and we're giving positive reinforcement to those students. I would also utilize the PBIS system, which I mentioned earlier in the project, which is like a ticket, like raffle system, and make sure we're giving out tickets to students that are doing well, and wrapping that into my my reinforcement system. Consequences, I would like to use verbal corrections to keep them on task. Just, hey, stay on task, stuff like that. If that's not enough, which oftentimes it's not, then I would get more into having that behavior observed, and maybe if it's really kind of getting out of control, then going into the actual FBA process and figuring out like an educated way to deal with that behavior that way. How would my rules be taught? I would teach them by using social stories, which this would be during my social my social class time that I have laid out in the schedule, my social skills class time, and they would actually I would like to take real life examples of when these rules would apply outside of the classroom, and then have them learn about it that way. So like following directions, we have a social story about someone who, has a job. Maybe they're like a lifeguard, let's just say, and part of their job is to follow the directions of making sure you're watching your water, making sure everyone's safe. And what are the consequences of not watching your water and making sure everyone is safe? Well, then you might have to jump in and save someone, or you're really endangering lives. So stuff like that. I really want to take a conscious effort to tie my rules back into their everyday life, so they can take these rules and utilize them outside of the classroom. I'd also, for the first 2 months or so, or however long it takes, depending on how fast the students are catching on, I would go over just real quick, just like 2 to 3 minutes every day, just go over the rules really quick so they have them memorized. I only have 4 rules, so it really shouldn't be that hard for the students to catch on. So yes. And then the last thing is, like, why did I make the choices I did with these rules? And that really goes back to what I learned in Sean's class, what I've learned in your class. We want to make sure these rules, this isn't just some like big list, intimidating thing with, one rule and then 25 bullet points. That's like obviously extreme. But we would want to make sure that these rules are practical and they make sense and they're covering the universals. And not only that, but I really want to tie this back into their everyday lives to make sure that, rules like respecting others' belongings, that is a rule not only for this classroom, but it's also just a societal rule too, right? Like, you can't just go up to someone's car and, and start keying it and destroying it. That's a no-no. You can't just, take someone's purse and rip out all the contents, to make sure that this is stuff that will actually benefit their lives outside of the class, is why I landed on the rules that I did. And I really want to drill that home with these students.